Welcome to another episode of That's Some Crazy Shit with Kelly and James. We are here for season 2. My name is Kelly and my co-host as always is James. How's it going, brother?
What's up, my sister? Things are good here.
This is the first podcast of 2021. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
We took a little hiatus. We took the month of December off, and it seemed like a really long time, didn't it?
You know, it really did. I kind of missed it.
Yeah, it was a much needed rest, though. We needed some respite.
It was.
And we've got a really great lineup for season 2. So I'm excited for season 2. And it's going to be good. It's going to be good.
I'm excited. You know, we were talking about some pretty cool stuff. I think we got a good season planned.
Yeah, we've got some guests planned. We've got some stuff coming up. I think you're going to really enjoy the things that we have coming up and what we have coming up today. So today we have a really special guest, a great guest to kick off 2021, because the one thing that me and James want to do is we want to be able to show, or rather prove, that we are legit, right?
You're serious. We're not just, talking off the cuff.
Yeah, we want to be legit. And so in order to be legit, we bring you legit guests. And we have a legit guest today. Today we are bringing you a physician, a GI doctor, a gastroenterologist, a pediatric gastroenterologist by the name of Dr. Paul Tran. Now, Dr. Tran is going to join us today, and I'm so excited that he's here. I'll give you a little bit about him. Dr. Tran grew up in the East Coast in Maryland, and for most of his childhood, he was a competitive figure skater.
Wow.
Yeah, he was a figure skater. And his family actually moved to Colorado Springs so that he could train when he was in high school. And so he trained in the Springs to be a competitive figure skater. Then this is so funny. So he retires after high school. He retires from figure skating. And he goes to Duke University, where he majors in classical civilizations.
Oh, I know. When you told me that, I was excited.
Right? So then after that, after graduation, he goes and gets a master's degree from the University of Cincinnati in physiology. So he's got this undergrad from Duke. Now he's got a master's. Then he goes to medical school at the University of Colorado. After medical school, he goes to Dallas to do his residency in pediatrics at the University of Texas Southwestern. After he completes that, now when you complete your pediatric residency, you can practice. You're a doctor. But he didn't want to do that. He decided to continue his education. He then is now doing a pediatric gastroenterology fellowship at the University of Colorado and Children's Hospital of Colorado. And he says he even hopes to continue his education and his professional career and focus on medical education and advanced endoscopy.
And that it's interesting that his bio tells you a lot about him. But you think he was a competitive skater. That takes incredible discipline. So at a very young age, he was very disciplined. Then he goes to Duke. That's not just a school that anyone goes to. Then he continues his education, gets a master's. This guy is focused. He's dedicated. That is very cool. And anyone who wants to help kids, I got to give it to him.
And that is why we are legit. And it's some crazy shit that we're legit. So I want to introduce you to our guest for today, who's going to be talking all about the stomach and how all of that part of the body works. Our guest, Dr. Paul Tran. Dr. Tran, thank you so much for being with us on That's Some Crazy Shit. This is our first podcast of 2021. Happy New Year. Happy New Year, James. Happy New Year, Dr. Tran.
Happy New Year. Thank you for having me.
We are excited because you are like a legit doctor, right?
Not like a witch doctor.
Not like a witch doctor, a legit doctor. And so tell everybody kind of a little bit about your background, what kind of doctor you are, even though I kind of told them in the bio. Tell them, what kind of doctor you are and give us a little background.
Sure thing. So I am currently a fellow, so still in the last stages of my training, but a fellow in pediatric gastroenterology, or for GI for short. So the way I like to explain it is I am a pediatrician, board certified pediatrician, and I'm finishing my specialty training in pediatric GI. So what I do is I see everything from constipation to reflux to belly pain in pediatric patients primarily, so under 18. For the most part, and we do some really cool procedures, like if you've heard about colonoscopies, endoscopies, so scopes is one of the cool parts of my job.
That seems like a really specific field, doctor. How did you decide on that specialty?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I learned in medical school pretty early on that I'm a big kid, and why grow up if you don't have to? If you hang around kids and teens most of the day, you can't take yourself too seriously. So I wanted to go into pediatrics, and one of the cool things about pediatrics is you don't just treat a patient, one patient, an adult patient. You treat a child, a teenager, and the family that they come with. So it's really multiple patients who you're treating. I thought that was really fulfilling. And then I was exposed to GI, pediatric GI specifically, in my last year of medical school. I was handed a scope and told to play around with it. And I was hooked, and I was like, this is the field for me. And it's a really cool thing, that the pediatric part and then also the GI part, because you get to build relationships with patients over a long period of time. It's not just, one visit and then you're done. It's months, years of a relationship you can build.
So being a doctor is really impressive when you can say I'm a doctor, but I don't think most people know what it takes to go to be a doctor, right? Mm-hmm. So tell everybody what your education journey looked like to where you are today.
Yeah, I think it's my educational journey is kind of like a national amazing race. If you look at it, like where I've been, I went to college at Duke for undergrad, and I got a degree in classical civilizations there. So that's actually a misnomer. You don't actually have to get a degree in biology or chemistry. You can study whatever you want before medical school. And I thought, if I'm going to do science for the rest of my life, why not just learn about Greek mythology? And I
excellent.
I wrote a thesis on Carthage versus Rome in the Punic Wars, and how generals lead their armies, like versus Hannibal Barca.
You're giving me cold chills, doctor.
What was that?
I'm getting cold chills.
I know.
Because you are right up his field. When you said civilizations, his whole face lit up.
I just think that stuff is so interesting. I do.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I took a mythology course in freshman year, and it was just a professor just telling us stories. It was story time with an esteemed professor, and I was hooked. So that's what I did in college, and then I actually got a master's degree in physiology at the University of Cincinnati for a year, where I learned all about physiology, anatomy, got my master's there, and then I went to medical school here at Colorado, School of Medicine. So that's 4 years of training after a master's degree, which was 1 year. That's 5 years out of college, and then I completed residency in Dallas and that was pediatrics residency. So residency trained me to become a pediatrician. And then now I'm in my second of 3 years of GI fellowship here in Colorado. So all in all, that's 1 master's, 4 medical school, 3 residency, and then 3 a fellowship. And then there's potentially some more advanced training involved after. So definitely not for the faint of heart or the impatient.
Exactly. Excellent. That's cool.
Took a long time.
Yeah.
So I always find it interesting when somebody wants to go into GI or a gut doctor, as I call them, because I mean, if there's a lot going on in that area of the body. So, tell me something that maybe that you get where somebody kind of has a misconception or misunderstanding about exactly it is what you do.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think kind of how I introduced what I do as a GI doc, one of the first things that I sometimes explain to patients and families is I do really cool procedures, or GI docs do really cool endoscopic procedures. So scopes, that's kind of through the mouth or through the bottom. We don't do surgery. Surgeries or surgeons do cutting procedures. So if you think about kind of the most kind of standard operation or surgery that I think of, an appendectomy or removal of the appendix, that is something a GI doc, even though that's an organ in the body, in the belly, we don't do that. That's a surgeon, and that's a surgery. So something I like to delineate is the responsibilities of a GI doctor or a gastrointestinal doctor, and then a pediatric surgeon or a surgeon in general. That's one thing. And then I think another misconception is that in medicine overall, not just GI, there is a clear answer to everything, and there's a silver bullet to every problem. I think that is a huge misconception, and I think that's just kind of culture in general, culture in medicine, but there's a lot of things we know, but there's even more that we don't know. There's a lot of answers and a lot of diagnoses we have, but probably even more that we don't. So I think a misconception is that we have every answer and we have every cure and it's quick. And man, if there was, we wouldn't have jobs.
Now, is it true that things like the what are they called, probiotics, do things like that help in your gut, keep that gut healthy, or is there anything you can do to keep your gut healthy?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Probiotics and that kind of question is this really burgeoning field of research in something called the microbiome, which is essentially your gut flora. You have more bacteria in your body than actually cells, human body cells. And you have normal and healthy bacteria that live in your gut, and they help with a lot of different things that we're still trying to do research on and figure out. So, it has effect on disease, it has effect on overall health. So we just don't really know the best ways to live with them, essentially, and don't know everything that they do yet. So that's kind of the question with probiotics. Well, probiotics, good bacteria. Do I introduce more good bacteria? I think the short answer is probiotics probably have their place. There's not a lot of evidence out there for the things that they do well. For instance, in looking at the literature, I can think of 2 main reasons that I would recommend probiotics for a patient, and it would be preventing antibiotic-associated diarrhea and something called C. difficile diarrhea. Other than that, there's not that much strong evidence for their benefits, but there's also probably not as much evidence for their kind of ill effects either. So, do they hurt? Maybe not. Do they help? We don't know. So I think there is probably some role for, if you want to consider antibiotics or probiotics, consider something like yogurt. Cheap, easily obtained probiotic rich source. And I would say my big plug for gut health is everything's in moderation. Too much of something can affect our flora or the bacteria in our gut. So I think, eliminating all carbs, eliminating all fat, and replacing it with something else. Do we know the benefits long term? Maybe not. So I think everything in moderation is really good for dietary health. And then I think the biggest thing is avoid unnecessary antibiotics. Antibiotics are really, really good for their indication, but if let's say you have an ear infection, or what you think is an ear infection, ear pain, or you're just coughing and you think you have pneumonia and you happen to have a Z-Pak or a azithromycin laying around, it's probably not best to just pop it and say, oh, I have this laying around, I'm going to take it, because you could be causing a lot of effects in your microbiome and wiping out your good bacteria, and that could cause other problems. So I would say, if you're going to use antibiotics, use them wisely and at the discretion of your healthcare provider.
So I had heard, or actually I had read, that we are learning now that the stomach has a brain.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I find that incredibly interesting, because we were always taught that your brain was in your head and that's where your brain was. But I had read now that they are saying that the stomach truly has a brain of its own. And I'm curious, number one, what are your thoughts on that? How can you explain that? Is it really a brain? Because I think when we think of brain, we think of like the brain in our head. So if the stomach has a brain, where is it? That's what I want to know. And how does it communicate with your other brain, or does it communicate? Explain that to me, because I don't get it.
And that's for mental health.
Yeah.
Can your gut get depressed?
Yeah.
Those are fantastic questions. There's a whole field actually devoted to this topic. It's called neurogastroenterology. So essentially a neurologist of the gut, neuro and gastroenterology. You're referring to what's called the second brain, or the enteric nervous system. So nervous system, when you think nervous system, you think brain, spinal cords, nerves. Enteric really is intestinal. So the second brain is the intestinal nervous system that actually doesn't have a central organ. It's not like, oh yeah, your brain, your second brain is actually, it's sitting on top of your stomach. It has the folds like you think of in the brain. It's actually a gigantic network of neurons or nerves that run from your actual brain in your head to everywhere in your gut. So I would think about it more as a major extension similar to the spinal cord than an actual singular brain itself. And there are more nerves running to the gut than anywhere else except for the brain itself. It's hundreds of millions of neurons. And this is the best way that I like to explain it. What does it do? It helps you with digestion, grinding, absorption, defecation or pooping. All these things, do you want to clutter your brain or your active process with thinking about? If you did, we wouldn't get anything done. We would move literally from thinking about the toilet to food to absorbing our nutrients. You're like, well, that sounds like half of my day already. But we would be even more inefficient if all of these processes weren't just autonomic or automatic. And that's actually interesting, because the enteric nervous system, or the second brain, is actually an extension of what's called the autonomic nervous system. It actually is regulated by your brainstem, breathing, all these things that you don't think about. It's the autonomic nervous system.
That is cool. So this brain that works in your stomach, and so at what point did they discover that this was in fact a second brain? Because this is something that I heard maybe in the last 10 years, maybe. It's not like this has been a real popular thing. And I think maybe when I read about it first, it was more like a theory, but it seems now that you said there's a whole branch of medicine dedicated to it. Do you know how old that branch of medicine is?
I think there's a book called The Second Brain, I believe. I think it was published in 98. So, this is something that's at least a couple of decades old. I'm not quite sure when, the field of neurogastroenterology was discovered, but, we've kind of thought about these things for some time. And James, you asked about, well, you have a second brain, does it get depressed?
Yeah.
Yes, we don't call it depression. Instead, we call it irritable bowel syndrome. We call it functional abdominal pain. These are things that are really interesting because the word functional, when I describe this to patients, like the name of this podcast, sometimes patients can hear, you think I'm crazy. You think I'm making these things up.
It's true.
But here's a question. Have you ever had a migraine headache?
I have never had one, luckily.
I've had a really bad headache. Maybe could be classified as a migraine. Maybe.
Sure. So have you ever had a really bad headache that not from a hangover, not from dehydration, just because?
Yes.
I like to say if you took if you had an MRI of your head or a CT scan of your head, do you think that you would see something going on that caused the pain?
I would think there'd be some kind of evidence if you get an MRI or something, but I don't know. I'm not a doctor.
I would say chances are no.
No?
Chances are that headache, even if it's the worst headache of your life, if it's a migraine headache, if I do a scan of your brain, I probably won't find a lesion. I won't find a mass there that's causing it. I won't find bleeding. I was
thinking more electrical, I guess.
Sure. Like, I think you're thinking of like functional MRIs, like when people play classical music. Potentially. My sister's a neurologist. She would know. But I think for the sake of kind of illustrating it, it's similar to the second brain in your gut. If you have irritable bowel syndrome or functional pain, if I got a scan of your abdomen, if I did a bunch of lab tests, if I did a scope, I probably wouldn't find many things going on. I wouldn't find inflammation. I wouldn't find ulcers. I wouldn't find things that I could say that is causing the problem. That doesn't mean you're not having pain. It doesn't mean with irritable bowel syndrome, you're not having pain and diarrhea and all these problems that are embarrassing, that are just really inconvenient, that are painful. So these are all we think about them as nerve problems. We think about them as messages, neurotransmitters that are going from the gut to the brain to the gut. These messages are just messed up. They're getting mixed signals. And when your brain is telling your gut, like at Thanksgiving dinner, hey, get ready, you're about to eat a feast, instead of getting ready and your stomach grumbling and in a good way, getting ready for food, instead it's hurting. So when instead of your stomach telling your brain, hey, I'm full, it's saying, hey, be nauseous, hey, throw up, hey, hurt. So you're just getting the wrong signals. And all of this, we think, really relates to the second brain and the brain-gut axis.
That's incredible. It is. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is really fascinating. And we're still learning more and more every day.
I bet you are. So I had somebody, when I told them that we were going to be talking to a legit, and I keep going to emphasize that a lot, a legit board certified physician, they asked me to ask you the following question. What is the difference between diverticulitis? Help me out here.
Diverticulitis.
Yes, and diverticulosis.
That's a really good question. It is a better question for an adult gastroenterologist.
Okay.
Say that. So diverticulitis and diverticulosis are problems that we see in adults almost exclusively. We don't see this in the pediatric population, but the kind of general medical trick is you think about the root of the word and the stem. So diverticulosis is a problem where you have kind of an outpouching or diverticulum in the colon. So that's osis, that's just a condition, whereas itis means inflammation. It doesn't always mean infection, but it means inflammation. So diverticulitis is where you have diverticulosis or diverticula that are inflamed, causing problems. Then it becomes an itis. So think about appendicitis. Until it becomes a problem, it's just an appendix. And then when it's a problem, it becomes inflamed. Then it becomes appendicitis at the end.
So any itis is bad?
Not necessarily. And one of the misnomers is that any itis is infection. Not necessarily. It just means inflammation.
So I have a question regarding the intestine, the small and the large. Number one, when you look at pictures of the body, the intestine just looks like a giant
worm.
tube. Yeah, just like all compacted. So how do you know, number one, what's the difference between the upper and the lower, or the small or the big, or whatever you want to call it? And like, how do you know where one ends and the other begins if it just looks like a giant worm?
Really interesting question. There are anatomical landmarks that surgeons use. So actually, there's two answers to this question. Whether you're looking at the structures from the outside, like a surgeon would, when they open up the belly and they can see the organs from the outside, versus when I can see it from the inside through a scope or inside the tube or endoscopically. So the different parts of the GI tract actually come from different places embryologically or in development. So the esophagus, the swallowing tube, looks different than the stomach, and there's clear markers of the opening and entrance of the stomach. And then the small intestine has, if you've ever seen the Magic School Bus, it's like it's like little finger-like projections called villi. It looks like coral. It's beautiful in the small intestine. And then as you're moving through the small intestine, those villi, those finger projections actually change in appearance. And then you get to the colon and they disappear and it looks more like a tube with folds in it. So inside, it actually looks really different. To answer your question, Kelly, the upper intestine, I generally think about, as a GI doc, the esophagus, the stomach, and part of the small intestine are the upper tract. And then the small intestine actually can be 25 feet in length. So it's actually the majority of the small intestine is in the lower tract, and then the colon or the large intestine is part of the lower tract. So there is an anatomic landmark for those curious. It's called the ligament of Treitz. It's a surgical landmark that kind of delineates the upper intestine and the lower intestine, or upper and lower GI tract.
So how long is the intestine in total, doctor?
Let's see. I would say, so small intestine, I would say average 25 feet. In an adult, I think the colon's about 5 feet. So that's up to 30 feet right there. And then you have your esophagus and your stomach as well. So we're talking, over 30 feet. Yeah, and most of that is small intestine.
That's crazy.
All crammed in there.
I always thought the stomach was bigger because, like when you get done eating and you're full and, you're like, oh, I ate all this food, my stomach is big. But really, the stomach is not as big as I thought it was. And I learned this over time. The stomach really isn't that big. How big average is like the average stomach? How big is that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know about average size for adults. I'm dealing with these small,
right.
These very small.
Let's just say kids. On average, what's the average size of a child's stomach?
I would say it depends on what state it's in. That's a good question that I don't know the specifics of. But one of the things that you're talking about is, think about it like a balloon. The stomach is really meant as a reservoir, and it's really thick, muscular, and it expands really well. We call it accommodating food. So in its resting state, if it's completely collapsed and there's nothing in it, I would say maybe the size of a fist. It's probably big, a little bit bigger than that, but it can expand out to hold a lot of volume and there's little folds in there called rugae. If you think about if anyone who eats tripe, thinking about the inside of a cow's stomach, there are these.
Not pretty.
It's not pretty, and that's kind of what we see when we do scopes. There's folds, and they actually accordion out, and then those folds disappear as the stomach stretches more and more.
I think that's so interesting. I think it's an interesting branch of medicine that you've gone into. And I will say, from a personal standpoint, when one of my kids was born, when he was a baby, because he was premature, so he was born at 22 weeks, and he was doing fine until he got what they called NEC. And NEC is like a necrokizing endocolitis, whatever. Had no clue what that was. Was told that it's rare, but it happens only in infants. And so I'm interested. This was 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. Is NEC still this mysterious disease that they don't know? Like, at the time when this happened, the doctors told me two things. They don't know where it came from, and they don't know why he got it. And the only way that they could get rid of it was just to go cut out the bad pieces of bowel. That's what they did. And everything is fine today. But my question is that still the same way that you would treat this disease?
Yeah, really good question, Kelly. I think it's evolved a lot. So you're talking about necrotizing enterocolitis. It is still a big problem today. We've made incredible advances, but some of the children that we see as pediatric GI docs are children who had NEC in infancy, and then we're dealing with the kind of effects of it, of severe NEC and surgical complications or implications long term. So NEC, the things we know broadly about NEC are it happens significantly more in premature infants, and essentially there's a lot of research that I don't know the specifics on going into it. It's really a fascinating field where neonatologists or NICU physicians who take care of premature infants do a lot of research on. But essentially, you have bacteria that cause problems and form gas, and it traps in the lining of the bowel, and it can cause a lot of problems like dead bowel. And Kelly, what you're talking about is surgical management of that bowel. Now, I think, in my limited kind of experience, but my pediatric training, we took care of infants who would get NEC, and we could treat it medically. So with antibiotics, we could give them bowel rest, essentially. So that's one way. You don't have to move completely to surgery. Now, there's kind of two branches. You can try to treat conservatively first, medically, and then if it progresses or if it's in severe cases, you intervene operatively.
Yeah, it tells you how medicine has come forth, or kind of how far it's come in that, because that was back then, that was the treatment. There was no other treatment. So I just thought I would ask that question. Yeah. So I won't ask all the questions. I'll let James ask some, but I have one that I thought this was really interesting, and it has nothing to do with you being a doctor at all. It's just something I want to know. Sure. So if you had a billboard with anything that could have anything on it, what would that billboard say and why?
Okay, this is not just because I'm a GI doc, but it's a wink at it. It would be go with the flow, right? It could be an advertisement for treatment of constipation. It could be just, do you have intractable diarrhea? Go with the flow. No, I think that there's a lot of in society now, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and there are so many reasons to be anxious. It is so easy to lose hope, to be anxious, to be nervous about what's coming. to not have any direction. And on the other hand, it's also easy to try to change what we, try to control everything in our lives. Ask about health, ask about finances, all these things that I think, and I'm speaking personally, I try to micromanage and I try to control everything, and we're like a tinkerer and just trying to change every dial. And I think sometimes we just need to remind ourselves that it's hard. Life can be really hard, and sometimes we just have to go with the flow. And there are seasons and years and decades which may not be what we want. And I think if we could all go with the flow and be a little bit more, take it as it comes, I think maybe we can address some of that. I mean, obviously that's an idealistic way, but it's also, I think it's something that's an important message to say, hey, let's try to control what we can, and the things that we can't, see how we can, optimize to the best of our abilities.
I like that. Very nice. Okay, now I have to hit you with the paranormal, doctor, since this is kind of my thing. What is your opinion on the paranormal, Bigfoot? Yes, no, maybe.
So Bigfoot. I mean, Bigfoot. Are we sure it's not like a hairy guy running around? Are we sure about that?
Oh, you're killing him! You're killing him, Dr. Tran.
No, this is fine. This is perfect. Okay, my thing is, if it is one man or a group of people, how does that explain the volume of reports in such a wide location? I mean, there are literally thousands and thousands of reports over hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I agree. There probably are people out there. And it's funny. I just read a story about two people who were in the woods getting a little intimate, both of them in Bigfoot suits. Mm-hmm. And the sheriff was called to investigate. I mean, there are weird people out there.
It sounds like a hairy situation.
Yeah, very, very hairy.
Sounds like some crazy shit, Jim.
Yeah, that's some crazy shit. When you start dressing up like weird things and going and getting intimate in the woods, that's a little freaky. But hey, so no, what is your?
I haven't really, to be completely honest, I haven't really thought too much about the paranormal. Do I think, angels, demons? I think they exist. Extraterrestrial, UFOs, aliens, Bigfoot, mythological creatures. I mean, I learned, I studied mythology, Greek, Roman, Eastern mythology. I think it's fascinating. I really have not given too much thought about it, just time and interest wise, I guess. But I'll say this, if aliens come and they do some weird probing stuff, they might need a colonoscopist, an expert endoscopist.
Oh, he's putting it out there.
I'm just saying, my services may be needed, so I may be safe if there was some sort of culling.
It's a shameless plug, Dr. Tran, to the aliens that may be listening. Shameless plug. I have one question for you, because you had brought it up. You had mentioned that we're in a pandemic. Yes, we're still smack in the middle of a pandemic. You're a physician. How has COVID changed the way you practice? And do you think that you will ever practice the way that you practiced, say, in 2019, 2018?
Yeah. I think, yes, I think that we will. I think one of the biggest things is kind of what we're doing, and there's a lot of other modes of communication, and medicine has kind of evolved to include telehealth visits. And if you've never had a telehealth visit, it's kind of awkward because you're talking to someone for the first time potentially over a video interface, kind of like Zoom, and it can be really awkward, kind of creating a relationship. And I think medicine, especially GI, especially pediatrics, it's about the relationship that you build. One of the biggest changes to my practice and a lot of people's practices is including or exclusively telehealth visits. And for me, it's really hard because I am a very expressive person. I think the lack of touch on a physical exam, the lack of kind of nonverbal communication, even if you're seeing another party, it's really hard. It's really hard to build an alliance, a therapeutic relationship. So, one of the things I've changed is I probably have to be even more expressive verbally. And it's hard. I think, and when we are in person, we're wearing PPE. You're behind a mask, you're behind a gown, you can't see anyone's face. And I like to smile. I like to be very expressive with my face too. And when you're just seeing my eyes, it's really hard to communicate. So I think we've all had to develop a couple more tools, and I think those tools will persist after this pandemic is over. I think we will go back to some of what medicine was like before, but plus. It was like the old plus things that we've picked up along the way. So I'm hopeful.
Do you think that one day we'll be able to get rid of the mask?
I think so. Yeah.
That's my biggest problem with COVID is the mask. I'm just tired of wearing it, which I'm sure a lot of people are. But you being a physician, if you go into the hospital, you're wearing the mask all day, the whole time that you're there, you're masked up, and you probably will be for this entire year. I'm assuming. Yeah, that's right. I think I'm with everyone. I think the masks they can be cumbersome. They can itch. There's a lot of practical reasons to not want to wear masks. But I think when we're doing our part to protect others and ourselves, I think it's almost there's a nobility, a noble reason for it, other than a practical reason. So, I think that's wearing a mask, washing my hands, staying socially distant, and kind of listening to what authorities are saying. Is kind of my part. I view in trying to protect others outside of actually seeing people in the hospital. So. Right. Huh.
What would you like to see come out of all this, Doctor, in the end, when we finally hit towards the back end of this?
Yeah, I think one of the things is not an unreasonable fear, but a healthy respect for infectious diseases, for viruses, for bacteria, for realizing that we aren't prepared for everything that can happen. I hope to see preparation and also resiliency. I think there's so much resilience coming out of this, but I hope that persists. That people say we lived, those of us fortunate enough to remain healthy and live through this. We took a lot from this. We learned a lot, and we can bounce back. We're resilient, personally, community-wise, nation-wise, world-wise. We're resilient, and then I think I would like people to also realize that personal connections really do matter. Really do matter.
More than I think we realized.
Yes, and the people out there, who I think most people are just longing for that return to. I want to be able to interact naturally again. I want to be able to shake your hand.
Friends, go to dinner with some friends, have drinks,
right?
People over.
I hope to some extent we realize that maybe when I'm out with friends I don't need to be on my phone. Maybe I can soak this up and enjoy this, because we had blank so long where we couldn't do it. We couldn't even be out. So let's enjoy the time that we do have together. Let's seek out those opportunities, connect with people who we may not have connected with before, and actually have intentional, deep relationships with people. That's what I hope we move to.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see people, like you say, be more in the moment. You know, you see people go to dinner and, you know, half of them are on their phone. You know, and it's just, why are you there? You know, the reason you're there is because you want to interact, hopefully.
Well, it's all about the likes. You got to get you have to get the likes on from the picture.
So, doctor, is there more? Do more females or males have these problems with the GI, or how is that split up statistically?
Yeah, it definitely depends on the condition we're talking about. So certain conditions, pyloric stenosis is a thickening of the muscle at the end of the stomach. You see a predominance in male infants as opposed to females. Celiac disease may have a slight female predominance. But for the most part, I don't know certain specifics on why that is, but we can see some sex predominance for certain conditions.
Do you have any diseases that would be more, what am I trying to say, by race? Like, do you have like a certain population, say African Americans or Asians, that maybe suffer from a certain bowel disease than others?
Yeah, that's a good question. Off the top of my head, I can think of two examples. I think we can see some liver conditions. For example, we can see a higher proportion of Asian patients or Asian descent in patients with certain liver conditions. When I think about like demographics as well, in the Latinx population, or there's a higher predominance of you can see gallstone disease. So there is some you do see some patterns like that based on demographics, not just gender, but also age and also race, ethnicity.
And then, doctor, you had mentioned when you were describing these to me about arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis.
Yeah.
And they're all
they're
all kind of autoimmune diseases. Would you treat the GI stuff like you would MS, maybe?
Really, really interesting question, James. I think so. One of the kind of group of autoimmune diseases that we kind of see a genetic link with includes inflammatory bowel disease and ankylosing spondylitis, reactive arthritis. Some of these autoimmune and rheumatologic conditions, they actually have similar treatments. One of the things that you can hear a lot, like if you watch a lot of TV, are the ads for something called Humira or adalimumab, or certain antibody treatments like that can be used for treatment of Crohn's disease, for instance, as well as rheumatoid arthritis or other rheumatologic conditions. So you do see grouped diagnoses or grouped disorders sometimes being treated with similar agents.
Interesting. Wow, fascinating it is. It's a and the more we talk, these questions keep coming up. I think it's just so interesting how so many things in the body they're like, you wouldn't think a GI would have anything to do with your neurological or your nerves or whatever. It's just interesting how everything always ties together.
Yeah. I think that's one of the, really, to bring it back to your point about kind of mental illness of the second brain. That brain gut axis is so complex that you can certainly see why irritable bowel syndrome or functional disorders can be concurrent or seen together with anxiety, depression, mood problems. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Is kind of hard to say sometimes, right? But you can clearly see there's a link. When your body's out of whack in one area, it can be out of whack in another. The interplay is so important. So I think that's why it's holistic health is definitely important. It's not just about what medicines should I take, what probiotics should I take, what diet should I be focusing on. It's all of the above: exercise, mental health, sleep. All of these things are regulating our overall health.
So is there a field of medicine, doctor, that just has that focuses on overall health? Like, okay, you're having problems with your GI, so we need to get you in to see a social worker, psychologist, and you're maybe a neurologist. I mean, is there a doctor that kind of coordinates all that? Is there a field of medicine like that?
Yeah, there is a primary care physician or general practitioner. Yeah, so that's why one of the cool things I really have such admiration and respect for general pediatricians and family medicine doctors. My wife was a family medicine physician assistant, and I just have so much respect because you're seeing anything and everything.
My doctor can attest to that.
Yeah, and I view them as the gatekeepers because you're really just, they're incredible because they're thinking about so many different complex processes and different diagnoses and different organs and different conditions. And it's just by looking at a patient or looking at someone and saying, what's going on? I get to focus on poop. I get to focus on the feeding. I get to focus on a certain organ system. And it's really, really interesting. And just awesome to be a general provider and to be able to have such a wide reaching knowledge.
I have a new respect for my doctor.
Yeah.
You had mentioned that you're in the last year of a 3-year fellow. And
second out of 3.
The second year, you're in the second year of a 3-year fellow, so not quite the last year, and that you thought there might be additional training. Are you going to specialize the specialty? Are you going to specialize your GI now? Are you going to take that? Are you going to take that and specialize that even more? Is that what additional training would look like, or what more could you possibly want to learn? And it sounds like more school. So, you know what I'm saying? Are you going to keep doing this?
Well, you know what? I mean, I'm in my 10th year of training and more to come, I guess. It's one of the interesting things is you can always get a little bit more narrow in reach. So pediatric gastroenterology, hepatology, and nutrition is really the field that I'm in. So gastroenterology, the digestive system, hepatology, which is the liver, and then nutrition as well. So you can get special training, advanced training in hepatology and be a liver doc primarily. You can get training in nutrition and just primarily focus on nutrition. In neurogastroenterology, you can, or we call it motility, you can get special training in that second brain that we talked about. The training that I was looking at in terms of after my fellowship is advanced endoscopy. So those really interesting, novel, unique endoscopic procedures, really getting training to do those. There's a procedure called an ERCP, which is a very specialized scope to get into the plumbing of the bile ducts that drain the liver, the pancreas, and the gallbladder. So that requires special training. And, I think that's one of the really cool things about medicine is there's always something to be more focused on. There's always an opportunity to step back to. One of my other interests is medical education. And that's just an amazing field, which I think I would love to jump into because you get to explore how to really reconcile being a doctor with being a teacher. And
my field is education, doctor, and there's not a lot of people who can teach.
That's right. And just because you've been trained, just because you're a good player doesn't mean you're a good coach.
Exactly.
Just because you've been trained well doesn't mean you're a good trainer or a good teacher. I think there's a lot of research that can go into that and a lot of work that can be done to expand that field. Well, I think, student loans, the biggest part is primarily you take loans out for school. And I only had 4 years of school. Most of my training is postgraduate. Residency and fellowship and advanced fellowships, you're actually getting paid a salary. It's a training salary, but I actually have an exorbitant amount of student loan debt. Until a couple of years ago, I didn't know how to. I was paralyzed by it. I didn't know how to act with the amount of debt. And I think one of the cool things is I love my job. I get such a joy and excitement waking up to go in, and every day is different, and not every day is good. You have good and bad days in medicine and in training, but I love my job and I would not take it back. And I think I am doubly blessed because I'm blessed to have found something that I love, and then I'm doubly blessed to get to do what I love. And some people find something they love, and maybe being president is something they love, but not very many people get to be president. And some people are able to find jobs and can't do it, like being an astronaut. So I just think I'm really, really fortunate, and I think the student loans, I chip away at them and hope that someday that mountain is gone.
Well, I appreciate you being with us today, taking time out of your, I'm sure, incredibly busy schedule to sit and hash it out, with me and James and talk about some crazy shit. Because GI and that whole part of the body, and that's literally some crazy shit. Literally there.
It is literally.
So
it's not too crappy a job, though.
That's good.
But I love you guys must have some really incredibly funny GI jokes, I'm sure, that you make back and forth. Go with the flow. It's not a crappy job.
Yeah.
It's just me.
Just you. Well, thank you, Dr. Tran, so much for being with us. As always, we appreciate you. I would love to keep the door open and have you come back again. Maybe after you've completed your fellowship and you get your wings and you're a full-fledged doctor. Not that you're not now, but you're a fellow, right? And you'll be willing to come back and talk to us again about whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah.
Or whatever you want. We could talk more about Bigfoot. I'll convince you, doctor.
That's right. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of That's Some Crazy Shit with Kelly and James. We will be back next week. Yes, James?
Yes, we will be back next week. And I want to thank you for listening also. We really appreciate it. There are a lot of podcasts out there, and we appreciate you taking a time to listen to us.
So you can get us we're on Twitter, we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. All of the links are in the podcast description. We will see you next week. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Keep an open mind, people.